We have
maybe the time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So hello, I'd like to welcome everyone today to the George and Fahey Center for Healthcare Innovation Patient Public Engagement Lunchtime Learning Series. Today we get to start off 2019 with a wonderful guest speaker who's going to be talking a little bit about the importance of community engagement prior to basic science research. Just to begin, we'd like to start off by acknowledging that we are gathered here today on Treaty 1 land, home of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and homeland of the Métis Nation. And in coming together today, we respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we recognize the ongoing present-day colonial violence that's faced by Indigenous peoples within healthcare systems, education, child welfare, and governments. And we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Today, I have the privilege of introducing our wonderful guest speaker, Monica Kovac, who is a PhD student from Dr. Keith Boat's Laboratory in Medical Microbiology at the University of Manitoba. She obtained a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Manitoba in 2015 and is currently in her third year of graduate studies. And her research focuses on how immune status relates to the risk of HIV acquisition. She's interested in how immune activation induced through solvent use relates to HIV risk, as well as how the induction of a resting immune state can help protect individuals from HIV. Monica has been a part of several community engagement projects during her time in the Coke Lab, and most notably community engagement with Sunshine. So thank you so much, Monica.
Thanks for having me. Hey. So I'm Monica. Unfortunately, Dr. Coke is not able to be here today. He has a family emergency that he has to deal with, so just get me. Hopefully I can represent his side of it as well, because this goes back to before I was part of the lab. I'm going to be talking to you about community engagement prior to basic science research. So these are the learning objectives that were up on what I think was sent out for this presentation. I just put them up here again just as sort of a reminder of hopefully what I'm able to achieve. So by the end of the session, to be able to describe key aspects of engaging with community around basic science questions, to assess your dissemination strategy and determine if you have the right message in the right way, describe how community engagement can improve research questions. So I'm going to skip right to the end. I'm going to give you the take-home message before I get into how we did it. And so hopefully you can see here's what we kind of took away from this, and then we can walk back and see how we got to that point. So the use of a familiar analogy provided a platform for discussion, and most importantly, environment where everyone could contribute and understand the results being presented. That was what we kind of came up with at the end of it, and here's how we got about doing it. Before I get into our side of it, who is the community? The community is the important member of this, and the community is actually the beginning member of this question. This is Sunshine House, and Sunshine House is located not very far from here on Logan Avenue. I'm bad at directions, so I'm not going to point, but it's somewhere that way. Okay, thank you. I was going to go there. They are a community-based health promotion organization that focuses mainly on street-involved individuals. Anybody can come up. Doesn't matter how you are, where you are in place, where you are in mind, you can walk through that door. The majority of whom in this community are Indigenous, and the group that we are working with as well. So the community and U of M researchers came together initially in 2007 when the director of the community came to Dr. Folk and said, we have some questions about health, and we think you can help us address them. That's kind of how this all started. This is the part before me. So in 2010, because we are in science and things can take a while to get the ball rolling, Courtney Bell, a master's student in the lab at the time, approached the community and said, you came to us asking about health questions, and we kind of continue that. Can we continue that discussion and see what are you interested in? So we sat down over several dinners, and the community and researchers talked about things like general health concerns for the community and participants, what they think of research studies, what research studies they've been part of in the past, kind of how that has gone, how they think it should go, and knowledge translation. What do they define as knowledge translation? What do they want to know? What are sort of their priorities? From this came that the community was not only open to research, but they were able to contribute to the design and questions of future studies in terms of what we wanted to be asking, how we would be going about asking that, and what that would look like. And they were interested in determining more about their health. The question that the study I'm focusing on that came out of this is, what is the effect of solvent use on my immune system? That was the community's question. He was searching for funding, and by 2016, we were ready to start looking at this question. That's when I came into the lab in 2015. So at the beginning of 2016, I kind of sat down, got a chance to sit down with the community and talk and reintroduce ourselves. So it had been time. The first study was 2010. This is now 2016. So members of the research lab, members of the community had changed. People had new experiences, new questions. We sat down again, reintroduced each other, got to know each other, talked about health, talked about questions, or was this the same question? Has it changed? Has it become more specific? And this gave our research a higher quality to it, because we weren't just asking a question to address sort of a black box that was unknown. We were asking a question that no matter what our results were, we were answering someone's question. Even if we didn't find what we thought we were going to find from a basic science perspective, we were answering the community's question. That gave it higher quality. And it improved the question because they were interested in it. So the community was invested. It wasn't just our project anymore, it was all of our project. It was the community's project as well, because this was their question. So after these meetings, we kind of wanted to draw back the curtain a little bit on basic science. So for a lot of people, when I say I do basic science research, they kind of look at me and go, so you take something and you come up with graphs at the end. But what's sort of that in-between stage? And that was sort of the question of the community too. We're going to give you blood, which is what our study works with. What happens to that blood that you come back with a graph? What exactly is going on in there? So how do we deal with samples? Where are the samples kept? How are they respected? How are they disposed of? How exactly do we generate answers? So we said to interested community members, why don't you come down to the lab and we'll show you exactly how we go about doing what we do. The first step was they got to see how exactly samples are processed. So from the tube of blood that they would see being drawn if they were enrolled in the study, what we do with that. So the first picture here on the left side is what it looks like when we spin that blood down. And we take the top two compartments, we look at it under microscopes. They got to look under a microscope and see what we see when we look at cells, which is a very undramatic picture here that just looks like a grid. They got to see how we were to culture cells and grow cells, which is that flask at the end. They got to see where we do our research. So in the top corner, you see everybody gowned up. We work in a level 2 containment lab. So they got to come in when the lab had been deconned and cleaned out and see where we keep our samples, our big liquid nitrogen tank, where we work, what machines we use. And then they got to do some science of their own and see how we actually, on a day-to-day basis, go about generating answers. Which we got the response, really interesting questions, cool stuff. Man is what you do born. I don't think you can use it any scientists, but we got to see what we do. Following this, we began the scientific studies. This is when enrollment started at the community, and there was a pilot study, so it was 27 participants, and this was to address the question, what is the effect of solvent use on my immune response? The side benefit of this we hadn't really thought about was how fast enrollment went. Usually when we do studies, especially for basic science studies, we have a lot of how are we going to enroll participants? How are we going to get people interested in it? What we did was put up those pictures from the previous slide. And the members of the community said, yeah, let's put them up. Let's show them up in Sunshine House because this is a part of what we did. So members of the community that were kind of going, I don't know, do I want to be a part of this? If they didn't want to come talk to us, they could talk to their peers that were in the pictures and say, you met them. What do you actually think about these? If they're not here right now, so what do you really think about them? And our enrollment was done in about a month and a half. That was it, because it became the community's project. It wasn't our project, our face, it was their project, their face now too. Once we had our scientific results done, comes the dissemination. And the important part of the dissemination was to provide community members with, in general, a greater understanding of their immune response. Sort of not looking at what we discovered, but just in general, what is your immune response? What does it do? Why do you need it? Facilitate discussions with the healthcare providers. So they can go into that doctor and say, this is what I want to look at, and I know stuff about it, and I can talk to you about it now because I have that background. And to provide meaning, interpretation, and context to the study results. So we came with the raw data. This goes up, this goes down. From an immune system perspective, that's what that means. What does that mean in the context of your perspective, in the context of your lived experience, and what you see on a day-to-day basis with solvent use? So how did we do that? We had an analogy. Basic science pictures can be kind of boring. If I were to put this into a basic science picture, I'd have a bunch of colored circles. And that would be about it, and they'd be moving around. Instead, we picked something that is more familiar. So your immune system, how does it work in our analogy? Your body is like a house with a fence. First step you have is your skin. It keeps outside out, inside in. Like a fence around your house. What's outside of your house, what's inside of your house. You also have these cells in your body that roam around and they're looking for foreign invaders. It's like having guard dogs, these natural killer cell guard dogs. They roam around and they look for natural foreign invaders and potential problems. Now, inside of our house, our body, that is our yard, we have centers, like a lymph node, which is like the house inside of your fence. This is where more members of the immune system kind of hang out and they sit and wait for something to happen. Now, what happens when you have an infection? An infection is like a robber. It gets past your vents and it wants to get in and infect your house. It wants to steal something. In this case, it wants to make more of itself. So our guard dog natural killer cell sees what's happening, calls out the alert. Our detective CD4 positive T cell comes over, figures out, aha, I know who the robber is. I'm the detective. I'm going to figure it out. Goes back to your immune system. The B cells, which are policemen, and the CD8 T cells are ninjas. I don't know about you, but my house has ninjas protecting it. They all get together and they talk, and everybody now knows what the problem is. Together, they go out and they kill off the infection. This is what happens in a normal immune response. So, how the immune system works. We went back then, kind of saw this top picture before, and talked about how do we assess the immune response. Not every member of the community came to visit the lab, right? It was only those that had free time and were kind of a little more interested in it and were there, right, when we went to the community. So this let everyone have a chance to see, from that tube of blood, what do we do? So from the tube of blood, we spin it down. You can see at the top, we talked about this yellow layer, that's your plasma. We can look at messengers. So cells can send messages to each other long distance. We can see who's there, and it's like a snapshot, like taking a phone and looking at the last 5 text messages that were sent. How are they talking to each other? We can also look at cells. We can look at them under the microscope, and then we put a picture here of, if you had a nicer microscope, what would those cells look like? Not what we see, which is tiny little dots. And then we culture them, and we have a machine called a flow cytometer that lets us look at one immune cell at a time and see who he is, what he's doing, is it functional, is he not, was he active recently, not active recently, and that gives us some answers in terms of what does your immune system look like in that snapshot. How did we use this to talk about our study results? I'm going to give you one example that we went through. So one of the questions that was asked is, what is the effect of solvent use on my ability to fight disease? My overall immune response when it's just sitting there, what does it look like if I'm using solvent versus not using solvent? So we found that we had more pro-inflammatory cytokine mediators. That's like saying, even if there's no infection, there's sirens going off all the time, telling your cells, we better get going, there's something happening, even if nothing's happening. These guard dog natural killer cells, more active, they're more restless, essentially roaming around more, they're kind of ready to go, even if there's nothing there. That's how we use our analogy to kind of address what was our study questions. Graphs that are just this goes up, this goes down, kind of boring. They didn't really want to see the raw data. They're like, show me the overall picture. What does that mean in terms of the immune response? And we discussed it. We would say, here's what we found, and then we would discuss what does that potentially mean? What are the impacts of that? So an important part of dissemination is making sure it's actually working. You can sit there and talk to people all you want, but if it's not the right message, or if they're not understanding it or really interested in it, you're not really getting your message across. So how did we assess if our dissemination was working? We didn't do anything formal like a questionnaire or anything like that. What we did is take a look at the conversation. So the community we're working with is very well spoken. And they will tell you what they want, and they will tell you how to do it, and they're great with that. You don't have to worry that they're just kind of going to sit there and be polite because you're doing your best. They're going to tell you what they think is going on. So we use exactly that. Are they talking to us? Are they doing comments? Are they questions? Are more things coming out? How is this going? The discussion afterwards, we talked about potential implications. What that might this mean on like a personal level? If I'm going into my doctor and they're saying, we're seeing this, well, what might that be because of whatever the doctor's thinking? Or, now I have some info to say, you know what? That could also be because of solvent. Also new avenues. So we presented 3 main questions that they had asked that we answered. And from that, we probably got 50 questions. But, okay, that's great. Now what about this? Let's go follow this avenue and kind of take a look a little bit deeper. Some community questions include, do solvents kill bacteria? So one of the initial thoughts in the study was solvent use was going to cause your trachea to be inflamed and a lot of immune activation, which is going to break down sort of that barrier and let bacterial products into your blood. We didn't see that when we took a look. So one of the community members said, okay, so if solvents hurt me and my body and my cells, what about bacteria? Are we not seeing more bacteria because it's not hurting my barrier, or are we not seeing more bacteria because solvents hurting bacteria? Sort of a thought that we hadn't kind of come up with. We were sitting there stumped over this data thing. I don't know what it means, but here it is. and they come back with these questions for you. Another one is, does solvent use affect our lungs? We looked at the blood, we looked systemically, the body as a whole. Now they want more specific. I'm sniffing, so I'm breathing in solvent. What's happening with my lungs? That's going to be the first organ that's in contact with. They want to do lung function studies. So all of this stuff was taken down as potential research avenues. Not all of this is going to be going through our lab, obviously. We are a viral immunology lab. I know nothing about lung function, but we know people that do lung function, so we can introduce them. Say, this is a researcher that does do lung function in infection and immunity. Let's talk, and maybe together we can put a bigger project with bigger questions that we can address some of this. So bringing it all together, what is some significance behind this? So community engagement and knowledge translation. It increased our study relevance and improved our question. We were answering a question that they asked. They actually wanted to know the answer. It became their study. Instrumental to study design. The way we did our study, the way the questionnaire was formatted, was based on what they wanted to know back. We are now putting in for a second study that is quite bigger, that is based on the questions that came out of that. Where do they want to go from here? So they are the ones asking the questions, and we are the ones hopefully trying to find the answers for them. Two-way street in that. We go back and forth. Helps refine the research question. There are some avenues that we wouldn't have pursued because we're a bioimmunology lab, and this is what we do when we get samples. We do ABC. But they wanted to know, DEF, because that's where their interest lies. Kind of expanded what we could do and what you know and who you get in contact with. And assistant study enrollment. Like I said before, this became their study. So they were interested in enrolling because this was answering questions that they really wanted to know, not just some abstract question that was out there. So at the beginning, I gave you the take-home message, and here it is in different words. So efficient knowledge translation requires that the community engaged in the study design, in the interpretation of the results, in the review of the research prior to publication of the findings. So it's their message that gets out there and how they were seeing it interpreted, not just the basic science way of looking at it. And this is just the thank you to, of course, my lab members that helped me with it. But mainly one is Margaret and the participants of Sunshine House, who it's their question. So without them, nothing here happens, right? And then funding, because that's funding. So I'm hoping that we can now get a bit more discussion about it, talking questions. So we might have gone a little fast.
Thanks so much. I guess, first of all, are there questions here in the room?
Or comments?
Comments?
So
Yeah.
you can just talk.
Who designed the graphic that injured the house?
That was between Keith and I. That we went. That went through many. You're seeing like the refined version, right? Went through a few rough stages first.
So did the
That is the design of the graphic that Keith had actually used before with talking to them. So that would have happened way back in 2010. The initial designing of it, we took it and reused it because the one that they were already familiar with. And they have all these slides. So it is a graphic that they use now and everything.
Thanks, that was fantastic and really inspiring. And there's so many things I would love to unpack that I'll temper my comments because I think some of them may have predated your involvement. So
I can try.
So, if you can speak to anything, I would love to hear more about just the initial experience about the research team engaging with Sunshine House and I think for other researchers trying to do this, we often hear these fantastic success stories, and it's the details in between of what we don't hear is that what we need to know, that how do we make this work? How many meetings did you have to have? There must have been some challenging conversations in there. What are the questions? I don't know if you were sort of tracking or keeping track of those things at the time.
The initial engagement was with Courtney Bell.
Yeah.
And the engagement period and the talking about research and what are the questions was her master's. So it was an entire master's project setting up this relationship to get this basic study.
Right.
So the study that I'm on would not have happened without her because she did the initial contact. Now the very first, the first community member and the research lab came together was Margaret Ormond, who was director of Sunshine House at the time, came to Keith. Margaret goes to a lot of HIV talks and HIV stuff around the city, and Keith goes to them. and presenting, and you're talking about your research, and she says, hey, we have questions that you're kind of touching at. We should maybe sit down and talk. And that was in 2007. 2010 then is when they got a student that was also interested on the project in the lab, and it is a lab, so funding, of course, right? And so part of her master's project was to sit down with the community, and they did focus groups, and they did one-on-one interviews, and they did dinners where the whole research lab went, or just dinners where just she was there. And they just sat and talked about health, and they sat and talked about health in their perspectives, and their lived experience, in what they were interested in. And we talked about what the lab does, and what the lab is able to answer, and sort of what sort of questions the lab is interested in to try and find sort of a common ground. Now that common ground isn't really what the lab had been doing before. It is different. The lab works primarily with groups in Kenya with women looking at HIV risk and prevention and resistance. So it is a step outside of that, but in terms of the lab techniques, it is the same basic techniques that you'd be using, so the lab was equipped to answer that. So it wasn't sort of a, we met for a couple times, 3 or 4 meetings here and there, come up with a question. It was very much several years to kind of get that relationship going.
Yeah, and just to build on, thank you for touching on that, because we actually had this conversation this morning at our meeting, and we talked about, so yeah, here's an example of going to talk to students in community engagement, and they actually didn't even get to the piece of what they expected to talk about, and we talked, we reflected on how so often there's those intro relationship building where you just have to have a couple nights or days where you just talk to each other in general, or you even get down the path of this. So it's great to meet you guys.
Yeah.
The dinners, the getting to know you relationship.
I think part of it too that I've been learning from talking to them is not going in with this is going to be my research question, and we're going to see how it fits you. If this is what I know how to do, let's see what questions you have that I can address. And from that, like I said, what is the effect of self-use on my immune system? That wasn't even on the table initially. That came out of these talks. So this is a ground where they're interested in, and we know how to do the basic science behind that, so we can work together to try and answer that question. Yeah, open mind, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if it's gone beyond research now, like if some Sunshine Houses like leveraged it for funding for solvents or.
So it's currently in the pipeline. We've submitted one that is a grant from Sunshine House that we are co-applicants on, just because it is easier to have things go through university than it is for them to apply to get funding directly. So at the moment, we're just sort of that bypass. But most of the study is going to be them, and then we're one little objective of it. It's also, the group that we work with has done before a solvent usage recreation project, it was called, through Mount Carmel Clinic. And through that, they created a band. So the lab has done stuff like Fund a CD, which really doesn't have anything to do with basic science research, but this is something they're interested in, and we can put that little thing at the end of our grant that says, for community engagement, and funnel it that way. They also do, so our dissemination was through something called Science and Supper, which is a Sunshine House event. They put on once every month, once every couple of months, depending on interest, where they bring researchers from Winnipeg together with the community over questions the community has interest in, and the researchers talk and present what is going on in their field, what they're finding, what they're doing on, and the community can ask them questions directly. They've had things like vaginal microbiome, they've had water, they've had prep use. Our dissemination was modeled after that because this is a format that the community knew, they were used to, they were comfortable with. So we went for science and snack because it was at 2 p.m., not 5. And we had food together, we sat and we talked and presented our ideas, and they presented their ideas back, and I went back and forth. So those are all Sunshine House. I don't remember the word right now. Events, or like missing the right word, but programs, Sunshine House programs that is on their side that have branched out.
I had a couple of online questions. First is from Michelle. She asked, did the community participants need to undertake lab safety training before they could enter the lab?
So we did this at a time when the lab had been decon. So once a year, the lab has to be decontaminated so that we can do things like service our equipment, because those people are not coming in for full training. So it was at that time. So there was no active work happening in the lab when they came in. Now, it doesn't actually take that long. It's about a day to decontaminate. The biggest thing is you have to book it off so that no other student comes in with blood to process samples. And anything they would have seen and would have worked with was all healthy blood. It wasn't anything infectious. I think it was one of our students in the lab. We said, quick, we need a vial of your blood. So there is that, like you can't have anything active going on when you're bringing people in. So it did take a little bit of setting up and coordinating in terms of that, but yeah, it was seeing that at that time.
We have a question from Daisy. Do you have any suggestions for applying this model to quality of life research that doesn't necessarily have a lab to bring to members?
I think you don't necessarily have to go into your lab. In terms of basic science, it's awfully hard to bring the lab elsewhere. If you are doing modeling or programming or that sort of thing, I would just say, are you guys interested in learning how we do what we do? And then talk to them about what that might look like. For us, they wanted to see where do we actually process and handle the samples. We couldn't bring that out of the lab for obvious reasons, it's bolted to the floor. So they had to come into the lab to see that. But if you were doing a modeling or creating sort of a program, there's no reason why you couldn't bring that to them with a computer and you can work through it, they can answer questions. The database that I'm working on for this study is shared with Sunshine House in terms of they can play around with data too if they want. And the hope is at the end they'll be able to take a look at graphs and play as they want to play. None of us know how to program that yet, so if anyone is programming, could use help. But I think so long as you talk to them about what do they want to see, and do they want to come into where you work, or would you like to bring it to them? That's the biggest thing, is making sure it matches their expectations and just talking to them. Might not look like what ours looked like, but it looks like what the community looks like.
Okay, but from your experience, like when you have a data interpretations or presentation, do you have facing any difficulty? Because sometimes the basic science, it can be complicated, like a topic to discuss in the lay language, right?
Yes.
Sometimes the language, the questions is very basic. However, it can be involving genes in DNA, proteins and things like that. How would your strategy for you to?
So 2 parts to that, I think, to answer that. The first one would be from when I got the data to when we presented it, there were several months. So I was playing around with that data for several months before, first off, I had to understand it from a basic science perspective, which you start with graphs, right? What has changed? And then you have to try and go to the literature to figure out what does that mean? And then it's figuring out what is the overall message. So they're not interested in, this goes up, this goes down, heat maps, that sort of stuff. They want to know what's the impact of this. The other thing I think too is not underestimating how much the community knows and talking to them about what are your interests and what do you know. From when we did the engagement, they came into the lab, we talked about science and they ran some like mock gels and ELISA. We just talked about what is this? You'd be amazed what CSI can teach someone. They knew about DNA, they knew about gel electrophoresis, they knew about running ELISA. They knew about pipetting and they knew how to hold it. Like they actually knew way more than you would think, just being a lay audience that has never had a formal science education. So I think just getting to know your community and getting to know their background knowledge. And when it's a question they're interested in, chances are they've done some reading. Like it's out there on the internet. This is something they were interested in. I doubt the first thing they did was come to us and say, hey, what does solvency do? They probably Googled it first. Mm-hmm. So doing that same sort of thing, going into Google and seeing what are, the top 3-5 hits that someone that's interested in this might click on, and using that as a background to what they might already know. I think that will kind of get you in the area of how to tailor your message. That helps.
I think it's very smart strategy to bring them to the lab and then those technology where you translate the studies very well. Yeah.
Also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We had a blast.
Another question in the webinar. Colleen asks, how did you fund all the relationship building that went on in the early stages?
So a lot of it really didn't take that much money. Sunshine House has a drop-in Mondays and Wednesdays, so I'd go to drop-in. And I'd just show up, I'd help do dishes, I'd help serve food, I'd plant seeds if that's what they needed, or just sit around and chat with people. So that doesn't really take funding, it takes time, but it really didn't take funding. What needed to be funded was things like the dinners. A lot of that came out of other grants that were currently standing that then sort of once you get a grant for this study, it cycles back kind of around, and some of it came out of just like the lab's general pocket. But for most of it, it didn't really take that much money because it was just sitting down and having the time to talk to people where they already were.
The basic question was, what's the impact of self-teaching online system? So when you delivered the answer to the question, was it on an individual basis or was it the group results?
So we initially talked about group results. Study is blinded in that I have study numbers, and I have those study numbers matched to questionnaires and to samples, but I don't actually know who the individuals are. So if they were interested to find out one-on-one, now sometimes they come up to you and they say, hey, by the way, I'm numbered that. They want to know, right? They're interested, they're involved. But if someone was interested, for example, they want to know exactly what their hormone levels are, because that's one thing we looked at, they would have to go to Margaret, who is the only person that has the form that links both the consent signature with the number. And then Margaret would say to me, I would like the info on participant, and I would forward that to her, and then she would pass that. There is a way for it to get there, such that I never find out who that individual is, and we don't kind of unblind it in that sense, because you get to know a lot about someone with those questionnaires and with the immune system stuff. Some people don't want to share that, some people do want to share that, but yeah, they could ask if they wanted to. We presented such that we had kind of a small screen behind us where we could do our picture, and we were sitting down and people were eating, and we just chatted overall, what did we see? We talked about overall trends, but then yeah, they could come and ask after if they wanted more individual data. It's a bit of a roundabout path, but it exists.
So again, it's just a great, inspiring success story where you figured out so many things to give us this great end product. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to, there must have been hurdles along the way. So like, were there any like standout things that were challenging to figure out that was work, and like what was that, and how did you figure that out?
We missed quite a bit of funding in terms of, we had about 6 grants for the second round of the study that we were hoping to apply for, that, between the community and us, we're like, yeah, we can do that. I think we applied for one. Just, it takes time sometimes to talk to people, and this date doesn't work, or you got to go more than once because not everyone comes to every drop-in. I'm also going to be doing a course. So for that, part of that would be getting help doing the analysis and talking to them about, this is a possibility in the future. And of course that had a deadline, but you want to talk to them first. Also challenges such as, I am a student, I'm expected, my committee wants me to be presenting at conferences. If I get the data, a month before the conference, and they say, perfect, put in the abstract, a month before abstracts are due, first I have to go talk to the community. I don't present anything to anyone without them seeing it first. They see the raw results first. They see the meaning, and we talk about it before I present it to any other groups. So you miss things, and sometimes you have to have a secondary thing that you can present on, or you kind of have to look back and say, is there something we can do with what's here? I have a second project, so oftentimes when I can present on this one, I do this one, and when it's not going to work timeline-wise, I present on the other one. So I kind of have a two-pronged approach there to what he wants me to keep presenting, right? The other challenges are how long basic plans take. So I think a lot of the community members kind of thought they'd get blood. We had it within a month and a half. We said, great, enrollment's done. And they were thinking in 2 months we'd have the results back. It took me a little over a year. Machines break, reagents take forever to arrive. You want to do everything in one run, and work, or this is down, and it takes time. So going into that context, so even when I had nothing to share, nothing new was happening, you go into Sunshine House and you say, hi, I'm just stopping by, I'm dropping off. Sometimes we bring like coats with us if they needed something, or help them with funding, go to fundraisers, had some CD releases that we went to, stuff at the fork, and just being that face so that they know it's not that we've forgotten and it's kind of gotten onto the back burner. It's really taking us a long time, and I'm sorry, but we are still, and then they can come and ask questions. They'll come up and be like, how's it going? And you can say, well, you would not believe what happened to our machine. We start talking and everybody starts laughing about it, and just kind of being open about the process and how much longer it's taking than I think what was expected.
So those are hurdles. So most of those hurdles you talked about overcoming are more around the academic side of things. Like, were there any challenges with the and were any challenges with the engagement part with the community? Like what? Finding dates.
Because it's a drop-in center. So you can say, yeah, on this day we can have people come into the lab and 50 people say, awesome, let's do it. And 4 will show up because it's a drop-in and they live lives, they're busy, and it's one afternoon that something might come up. A lot of them said this is a largely homeless population. They don't have cars. They don't easy way to get around. It was in January, so if you get a crazy snow, who's gonna try and walk 10 blocks to get through that? It's like, no, forget it. I'll stay home, right? Sometimes you don't take your car out. It's the same sort of thing. It's too hard. So in that, making sure that it's gonna take more than one go. So don't think, hey, we're gonna have this meeting and we're gonna talk about this. Know that you're gonna have this meeting, you're gonna talk about it, and next time you go, you might have completely different faces, you might have a completely different story. They want a completely different vision for the study. So being able to go multiple times, I think, and bringing that all together to try and form, in general, what is everybody interested in? You're not always gonna get the same people, and you're not always gonna get the same.
So how did you make decisions? Sorry.
We had an amazing person called Margaret who knows the community, and she's been with the community for such a long time that when we were really stuck in a pinhole, we could go to Margaret and say, what do you think? She could look at us and say, okay, I get it. Here's where you should be focusing your attention. And help us. So having that person in the community that is willing to stand up and speak to the community, and is also willing to go to the community and say, okay, guys, this is what's happening on this week, and you know what? We need people here. And be that voice from the community perspective, I think is really important. We can't do it on our own, unfortunately.
We have another question from Colleen. Can you comment on the importance of having the principal investigator support in this case, Dr.
Yeah, I think that goes a long way, especially in terms of community trust. Like I'm a graduate student. I'm not going to be in this lab forever. So in terms of the long-term prospects of the study, eventually I'm going to have to hand it over to another student. So if I am the only one that builds that relationship and that trust is between me and the community, when I leave, how do they know that the lab is going to do all those things that we talked about and all those ways I showed about perspective example? How do they know that's going to happen? The fact that Keith is involved in it, they know this is his lab's way of doing things. So any student that comes in, even if we have a summer student and they want to work on this project, you have to meet the community first. They have to get to know you first. So it takes time, but because he's here now for longer and he's the supervisor, they know that can go a longer way. Transition through students, funding. In terms of funding, he's the one that has to apply, right? So having his support means he's going to get the funding for things. But because he's got more than one study and more than one thing's going on and more perspective of basic science, and he's got a little bit more wiggle room to do things like the engagement and to fund that sort of stuff that this is a student on your own wouldn't. I think the biggest point would be that trust that as that one student leaves, things are going to remain respected and things are going to remain the way that you had initially talked about. And that one person that is constant throughout that relationship.
Excellent. Well, we'd like to thank you so much to Monica. Thank you everyone for joining us today, both in the room and via webcast. Given us such an amazing presentation and some insight, and we're so glad you were able to come and share. I think will the PowerPoint be available?
Some of it we can share, but we can't necessarily speak out and whatnot sort of stuff, but I can send you a
abbreviator.
First pictures might not be there, for example.
So there'll be a piece that found online as well, and thank you so much.